Her brothers sold her to a rival pack, unaware that the Alpha King dreamed of her. The forest lay heavy under the shadow of the blood moon, its silver light draped over the pines like silk, turning the mist into a flowing river of shadows. Elara walked quickly along the narrow path, her heart pounding with anger and fear. Her brothers had betrayed her, selling her to a rival pack without her knowledge or consent. The betrayal burned within her chest, sharper than any blade. She could still hear their laughter, as if mocking her, as they handed her over to strangers. The memory made her fists clench and her breath catch. Yet, as much as she wanted to turn back, she knew that she could not. The rival pack's fortress waited, looming beyond the edge of the forest like a dark sentinel, and there was no turning away from what was to come. Elara's life had been ordinary, simple in its rhythm, until the day her brothers decided their greed mattered more than her freedom. She had grown up among the soft whispers of the wind through the trees, learning the ways of the forest and the small magic that lived in her hands. But that magic had always been hers alone, secret and precious, never meant for the world outside. Now it seemed the world would force her to use it. The fortress rose from the mist like a black mountain. Towers spiraled into the sky, and the gates, carved from iron and etched with ancient symbols, seemed to watch her approach. She felt eyes upon her, unseen but weighty, as if the forest itself had paused to witness her arrival. Inside, the halls smelled of stone and smoke, of iron and age. The air hummed with quiet authority, the subtle thrum of power that reminded her this was no ordinary home. Here she was a guest, though a guest in chains of circumstance. She felt small, fragile, yet there was a part of her that refused to bow. Kalen, the Alpha King of the rival pack, watched her arrival from a high balcony. He was a man shaped by shadows and legend, whose name alone carried the weight of fear and respect. Yet beneath the stern mask of his rule, he harbored a secret he had shared with no one. For years he had dreamt of a woman, a figure of light and strength, whose presence haunted his sleep and tugged at the edges of his mind. And now she stood before him, alive, breathing, real. Elara's eyes met his for the first time, wide and defiant. She sensed something familiar, though she could not place it. The pull was immediate, a whisper of recognition that sent a shiver down her spine. Kalen's gaze, though piercing, carried more than curiosity. There was a depth of longing in it, a quiet ache that mirrored her own. The days that followed were filled with tension and uncertainty. Elara was given a room in the fortress, modest but comfortable, though she felt the walls close in with every passing hour. She was surrounded by strangers, wolves of a pack whose loyalties she could not yet understand. Every glance, every gesture seemed loaded with meaning. She had learned long ago to read people, to sense their motives, but here, everything was new and strange. Kalen did not approach her directly at first. Instead, he observed from afar, his presence like a shadow she could not escape. She felt it in the quiet moments, the brush of a hand on a banister, the soft echo of footsteps behind her. Sometimes she would catch him staring from a distance, and she would feel her chest tighten, a strange mix of fear and curiosity. One night, under the red glow of the blood moon, Kalen appeared at her door. He did not knock. He did not speak. He simply stood there, tall and still, his eyes locked on hers. Elara's breath caught, and she stepped back instinctively, but she did not run. Something in the way he looked at her made her pause, made her consider that perhaps he was not just the king of a rival pack, but something more complicated, something human. "I have seen you in my dreams," Kalen said softly, his voice almost a whisper. "Long before I knew you, long before this moment, you were always there." Elara felt her heart skip. Dreams. She had thought them meaningless, fragments of a mind at rest. But his words stirred something deep within her, a strange resonance she could not explain. "I do not know why you say this," she replied cautiously, her voice steady despite the tumult in her chest. "You do not know me." "No," Kalen admitted, a shadow of a smile crossing his face. "I do not, but I know you." There was a pause, heavy with meaning, as if the walls themselves had grown silent to listen. Alara wanted to leave, wanted to run, but she found herself rooted, caught in the magnetic pull of his presence. And then, as quickly as he had appeared, he turned and left, leaving her alone with the whisper of his words and the echo of her own heartbeat. The next days were a blur of new routines and tests. Kalen sent messengers, observed her, and allowed her to explore the fortress under watchful eyes. Every interaction carried a weight she could feel pressing on her chest. She was not a guest. She was not a prisoner. She was something in between, caught in a world where every gesture and glance carried meaning. Alara began to notice the subtle shifts in Kalen's behavior. He was not always the distant, untouchable alpha. Sometimes he would linger in the hallways, watching her practice in the courtyard, his eyes softening for just a moment before the mask of authority returned. She began to understand that his dreams were not idle fantasies. They were a part of him, shaping his decisions, influencing the way he ruled, pulling him toward her in ways he did not fully understand. One evening, as she walked alone through the forest near the fortress, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of rain and earth. Kalen emerged from the shadows, silent as the night. He stepped beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "You have a strength I did not expect," he said quietly. "A light I thought was lost to the world." Alara looked at him, her mind racing. She wanted to distrust him, to remember the fear she felt when her brothers betrayed her. Yet, in that moment, she felt something else, a recognition, a connection that transcended reason. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked softly. "Because you deserve to know," Kalen replied. "Because you are not like the others, and because I cannot turn away from you." The air between them was thick with unspoken words. Neither moved closer, yet neither stepped away. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the mist curling around their feet like a living thing. And then, as if pulled by an unseen hand, Kalen reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. His fingers lingered for a heartbeat longer than necessary, a silent acknowledgement of the bond forming between them. Alara's heart raced. She wanted to run, to fight, to reclaim her freedom. Yet she could not ignore the pull she felt toward him, the strange and undeniable connection that had begun the moment their eyes first met. She understood, with a clarity that frightened her, that her life had changed forever. The night passed with no further words, yet the silence was not empty. It was full of meaning, full of tension and promise. Alara knew that this was only the beginning, that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges and uncertainty. But she also knew, deep in her bones, that Kalen's dreams and her own destiny were now intertwined, in ways neither of them fully understood. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the fortress in hues of gold and shadow, Alara stood at her window, looking out over the forest. Her heart was heavy with betrayal, yes, but also with the strange, fragile hope that had begun to bloom within her. She did not know what awaited her in the days to come, or what trials lay ahead, but she knew that she could no longer be the same person she had been before her brother's betrayal and before the Alpha King who dreamed of her entered her life. And somewhere deep within the fortress, Kalen watched the forest from his tower, thinking of her, dreaming of her, and knowing that the moment she arrived had changed everything. The bond had been formed. The game of power, trust, and destiny had begun. And as the forest stirred with life and magic under the morning sun, both of them felt it, a thread, delicate but unbreakable, connecting them in ways that would shape not just their fates, but the fate of the packs, the forest, and perhaps even the world itself. The story was only beginning, and neither could yet imagine the trials, the longing, or the transformation that lay ahead. Cliffhanger. That night, as Alara drifted into a restless sleep, she dreamt of Kalen not as the stern alpha, but as a man she had never met, standing in a field of silver light, reaching for her hand. and for the first time, she wondered if dreams could be more than illusions. The sun rose slowly over the fortress, painting the towers in shades of gold and shadow. Alara had been awake for hours, sitting by the window of her chamber, watching the morning mist curl among the trees. She could feel the pull of the forest, a quiet call that seemed to tug at her very soul. And yet she could not leave, not now. Not while Kaelin's eyes lingered in her mind, his presence following her like a shadow she could neither escape nor deny. The days that followed her arrival were a strange mixture of observation and routine. Kaelin rarely spoke to her directly, yet she could sense his attention in every subtle glance and every fleeting shadow that crossed her path. At times, it made her uneasy, but at other times it sparked a strange curiosity, a desire to know the man behind the legend. He was not like anyone she had ever met, both commanding and haunted, a king shaped by power and loneliness. Alara began to explore the fortress under careful watch. She learned the layout of the halls, the secret passages hidden behind bookshelves and tapestries, and the courtyard where the pack trained. Though she was not allowed to join the exercises, she watched from a distance, noting the grace and discipline of the wolves and the alpha who led them. Kaelin moved among them with ease, a figure of quiet strength and authority. Yet even among the pack, his eyes often strayed toward her, and when they did, it felt as though the world itself had narrowed to the space between them. One afternoon, while walking near the edge of the forest, Alara felt the wind shift. It carried a scent of rain and earth, of leaves freshly disturbed. She turned, expecting one of the pack's scouts, but instead, Kaelin stepped from the shadows, silent as the mist. "You walk too far alone," he said, his voice low and calm. There was no accusation in it, only concern. Alara folded her arms, trying to hide the way her heart had jumped at the sound of his voice. "I am not afraid," she replied, her tone steadier than she felt. Kaelin studied her for a moment, the corner of his mouth lifting in a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Perhaps not, but fear is not the only thing that guides you. Curiosity can be just as dangerous." Alara frowned. "I do not understand." "You will," he said quietly. "Sooner than you think." There was a silence between them, filled with unspoken words and shared tension. Neither moved closer, yet neither stepped away. The air seemed to hum with a quiet energy, a thread of connection that neither could fully name. Over the next few days, Kaelin began to test Alara, not with harsh words or challenges, but with subtle observations. He would ask questions about her past, her family, and the forest she had grown up in. Sometimes he would watch her practice small exercises, asking her to demonstrate control over her magic, the gentle, quiet force that had always been hers alone. Alara resisted at first, unsure of his intentions. She did not trust him, not entirely. And yet, as she practiced, she felt a strange sense of approval in his gaze, a quiet acknowledgement of her strength. It was unlike anything she had ever experienced before, the feeling that someone could see her, truly see her, without judgment or fear. One evening, as the blood moon rose again, casting the forest in a crimson glow, Kaelin approached her in the courtyard. This time, he did not speak. He simply stood beside her, watching as she moved through a series of motions that controlled the magic within her. The energy flowed from her hands, delicate and powerful, as if it were part of the world itself. "You are stronger than I imagined," he said finally, his voice soft. "And yet you hold back. Why?" Alara hesitated. "I do not want to harm anyone," she admitted. "My magic, it is not meant for destruction." Kaelin nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Power is not only in what we can do to others. Sometimes true strength is in restraint. You have more of it than most." The nights grew longer and the bond between them deepened, though neither would name it aloud. There was a tension in every glance, a quiet longing in every unspoken word. Alara felt herself drawn to Kaelin, fascinated by the man he was and the dreams he carried. And Kaelin, for his part, found himself compelled by the girl who had appeared in his visions, a presence that seemed to complete the emptiness he had long carried. Yet their connection was not without obstacles. The fortress was full of secrets, whispers of betrayals and ancient feuds that had shaped the pack for generations. Alara discovered the layers of loyalty and fear that bound Kaelin's people together, and she realized that her arrival had set in motion forces she could not yet understand. One afternoon, as she wandered near the library, she stumbled upon a book of ancient prophecies. Its pages were yellowed and brittle, filled with stories of kings and queens, of curses and magic that flowed through the bloodline of rulers. She flipped through the pages, her fingers trembling, until a passage caught her eye. A light shall come to the king in shadow, a soul untouched by the chains of fear. Together they shall awaken the strength long hidden and break the curse of the blooded moon. Her breath caught. She read the lines again and again, a chill running through her. Could this be about her? About Kaelin? The thought made her pulse quicken, a mixture of fear and excitement she could not name. Later that evening, she confronted Kaelin in the courtyard, the words spilling from her lips before she could stop herself. "The prophecy, does it speak of me?" Kaelin's eyes darkened, and for the first time he seemed uncertain. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in the quiet of the night. "I do not know," he admitted, "but I have felt your arrival, Alara, as if the world itself shifted. There is something about you, something I cannot explain." Alara looked at him, searching his face for truth. In that moment, the walls between them seemed to fall away, leaving only the raw connection that had grown from dreams and silent observations. She wanted to trust him, wanted to believe in the bond they shared, but fear lingered like a shadow over her heart. The tension between them came to a head one night when a sudden storm swept through the forest. Rain lashed against the fortress walls, and the wind howled like a living thing. Alara stood at her window, watching the lightning streak across the sky, her heart restless. She could feel the magic within her responding to the storm, the energy coursing through her hands like fire and water combined. Kaelin appeared at her side, silent and commanding. He did not speak, but his presence grounded her, a steady anchor in the chaos. Together they stepped onto the balcony, the wind tearing at their hair and clothes, and for a moment the world seemed to pause. "You are not afraid of the storm," Kaelin said, his voice almost a whisper. "I am," Alara admitted, her hair plastered to her face by the rain. "But I cannot let it control me." Kaelin reached out, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. The touch was light, yet it carried the weight of all the unspoken feelings between them. "You are stronger than you know," he said, "and stronger than I ever imagined." The storm passed as quickly as it had arrived, leaving the forest glistening under the silver light of the moon. Alara felt a shift within herself, a newfound clarity and determination. She understood in that moment that her journey was not only about survival or trust. It was about embracing the power she had always carried and finding the courage to face the future with Kaelin by her side. As the days passed, their bond continued to grow, though danger and uncertainty always lingered at the edges of their lives. The fortress was alive with whispers and secrets, and every decision carried the weight of the pack's history and destiny. Alara learned to navigate the subtle currents of power, to understand the delicate balance between trust and caution, and to recognize the strength that came from both independence and connection. Yet despite the progress they had made, the shadow of uncertainty remained. Alara knew that her brother's betrayal had set in motion a chain of events that would not be easily undone. And Kaelin, though powerful and wise, carried the burden of prophecy and the weight of his people's expectations. Together, they were drawn into a web of destiny that neither fully understood, yet both felt in the marrow of their bones. Cliffhanger. One night, as the moon rose red and full over the forest, Alara's senses flared with warning. Something or someone was moving in the shadows beyond the fortress walls. She felt a tug at her heart, a mixture of fear and anticipation. And then she saw it, a figure approaching, silent and deliberate, carrying a message that could change everything. Kaelin appeared at her side, eyes wide with concern. Together, they watched as the unknown presence drew closer, and Alara realized that the trials ahead were far from over. The wind carried a chill as the forest whispered under the silver light of the moon. Alara stood at the edge of the fortress, watching the shadows stretch among the trees. Her heart was heavy, full of questions she could not answer. The figure that had approached the walls days before had delivered a warning. Her brothers were near, seeking to reclaim her. Their greed had not been satisfied, and they would go to any length to undo what they had set in motion. Kaelin had sensed it first. His presence had always been near, a constant force beside her, but now it was sharper, more insistent. He had spent hours in the library, consulting scrolls and texts about past conflicts, prophecies, and old alliances. The fortress seemed to hold its breath, aware of the tension that hung over its halls. "You cannot face them alone," Kaelin said one evening, his voice quiet as he stepped beside her in the courtyard. The moonlight traced his strong features, making him look almost otherworldly. "Their intentions are not simple. They carry anger, greed, and a will that could bring harm." Alara's jaw tightened. "I am not a child," she said, her voice firm. "I have my own strength. I will not hide behind anyone, not even you." Kaelin's eyes softened, though the shadow of concern remained. "Strength alone is not always enough," he said. "Sometimes wisdom, trust, and timing matter more. But if you insist on standing alone, I will be there to protect what you hold dear." Despite his words, Alara felt a flutter of fear. She had trained herself to be independent, but she knew the weight of Kaelin's gaze was more than just authority. It was care, and perhaps something more. The connection between them had deepened with each passing day, a silent bond that neither dared to name aloud. The approaching threat forced them both into preparation. Alara spent her days learning more about her own magic, practicing control, and understanding the currents of energy that flowed through her. Kaelin guided her with patience, teaching her to listen to the forest, to read the whispers in the wind and the signs in the water. Together, they discovered the subtle ways her power could protect, heal, and even influence the hearts of others. But the shadows of the past would not remain hidden. One night, as they practiced in the courtyard, a messenger arrived from the borderlands. He carried a scroll sealed with the mark of her brothers. Alara's hands trembled as she broke the wax and read the words. "We come for what is ours. Return to us or face the consequences." Her chest tightened. These were not empty threats. Her brothers had acted before, and she knew they would act again. But she was no longer the frightened girl they had betrayed. She was strong, guided by her own purpose, and by a bond that gave her courage she had never known. Kaelin's presence was steady beside her. "We will not wait for them to take what they think belongs to them," he said, his tone sharp but controlled. "We act first with clarity and strategy." Together, they planned. Not for battle, not for harm, but for protection. They would confront her brothers and face the consequences of the past with courage, using the strength of their connection and the wisdom they had gathered. Alara felt a surge of determination. She would not let fear rule her. She would reclaim her own destiny. The night of the confrontation arrived with a heavy silence. The forest seemed to hold its breath as her brothers emerged from the shadows, their faces hard, eyes filled with expectation. Alara stepped forward, her posture calm, her gaze unwavering. Kaelin was beside her, a silent pillar of support and strength. "Why have you come?" Alara asked, her voice steady. "Do you not see that your actions have consequences?" Her brothers exchanged glances, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. They had underestimated her, underestimated the change that had taken root within her. "We are your family," one of them said. "You belong with us, you always have." "I belong to myself," Alara replied firmly, "and to those who have earned my trust." Her gaze shifted to Kaelin. And to him, she added, her voice soft but unyielding. The forest seemed to echo with her words. A quiet energy pulsed through the trees, as if the land itself recognized the courage in her declaration. Kalen stepped closer, his hand brushing lightly against hers, a reminder of the bond they shared. Her brothers faltered, the certainty in their steps replaced by hesitation. They could sense the change in her, the strength she had gained since leaving their side. And they could sense Kalen, the Alpha King, whose presence alone commanded respect and attention. The confrontation did not end in violence. Words were exchanged, truths revealed, and old wounds acknowledged. Alara spoke of betrayal, of the pain she had endured, and of the life she had claimed for herself despite their actions. Kalen supported her, not with force, but with understanding, his presence amplifying the clarity and courage in her voice. By the time the first light of dawn touched the treetops, her brothers had retreated, their intentions checked by the power of her resolve and the strength of the bond between her and Kalen. The forest exhaled, the tension dissolving into the soft rustle of leaves and the distant call of birds waking to the morning. But the trials of the past were not the only challenge they faced. In the aftermath, Alara began to experience visions, fragments of memory and prophecy that danced at the edges of her consciousness. She saw images of her family's history, of Kalen's ancestors, of battles and alliances long forgotten. And always, there was the blood moon, a symbol of destiny and magic that seemed to thread through every moment of their lives. Kalen noticed the change immediately. "The visions?" he asked one evening as they sat beneath the towering oaks in the courtyard, the moonlight silvering their faces. Alara nodded, her eyes distant. "They are fragments, pieces of the past and the future. I see things I cannot fully understand, but they feel connected to you, to me, to all of this." Kalen reached out, taking her hand in his. The touch was gentle, grounding her as the vision swirled. "Whatever you see," he said softly, "we will face it together. You are not alone, Alara. Not now, not ever." The words settled over her like a warm cloak. In that moment, she realized that the bond between them had grown deeper than she had dared to imagine. It was no longer simply curiosity or fascination. It was trust, connection, and the quiet understanding that they were bound by something larger than themselves. Yet even as they embraced this newfound closeness, a sense of unease lingered. The prophecies she had discovered hinted at forces beyond her understanding, of powers that could rise or fall depending on choices made in the present. And while her brother's threat had been checked, it had also awakened the awareness that the past could never truly be ignored. Days turned into weeks and the fortress settled into a rhythm. Alara continued to practice and learn, guided by Kalen's wisdom and her own intuition. They explored the forest together, the mist curling around their feet, the moonlight casting a silver glow on their path. In these quiet moments they shared stories, laughter, and the comfort of shared presence. One evening, as they sat by a quiet stream, Alara spoke of her dreams, the ones she had always kept secret. "I have dreamed of a life beyond the forest," she said softly. "A life where I am free, where I am not defined by the choices of others." Kalen listened, his hand brushing hers. "You are free now," he said gently, "and together we will shape the path ahead, not bound by fear, not bound by the past, but guided by what we choose to become." The moon rose high, full and luminous, reflecting in the water and casting a magical glow over their faces. The connection between them felt unbreakable, a thread of destiny woven through time and circumstance. Yet even in this moment of peace, the world outside remained uncertain. The whisper of the wind carried a warning, subtle but persistent. Somewhere beyond the fortress walls, forces were gathering, ancient magic, unseen eyes, and hidden truths waiting to reveal themselves. And though Alara and Kalen could not yet name the danger, they could feel its presence, like a shadow at the edge of their lives. Cliffhanger. One night, as Alara slept, the visions returned with a force she had not felt before. She saw the fortress surrounded by a circle of shadows, figures she did not recognize, and a single word echoed in her mind: "Awaken." She woke with a start, her heart racing, and Kalen was at her side, his expression tense. Together, they realized that the trials ahead were no longer whispers or warnings. They were coming, and soon, their choices would shape the destiny of not only themselves, but the entire realm. The first light of dawn crept over the fortress, painting the towers in soft shades of gold and silver. Alara stood on the balcony, her gaze sweeping across the forest, now calm and still after the storm of the past weeks. Yet beneath the beauty of morning, a tension lingered. The visions had grown stronger, more insistent, whispering of challenges she could not yet understand. Kalen approached silently, his presence steady and reassuring. He had been awake for hours, studying the horizon, listening to the subtle shifts in the wind. His eyes met hers and she felt the familiar pull of connection, a bond that had grown through trust, understanding, and shared trials. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice low but firm. Alara nodded, though her heart fluttered with apprehension. "As ready as I will ever be." They knew that the shadows from her visions were more than just dreams. Ancient forces stirred in the forest, waiting for the right moment to challenge the strength and courage of those who dwelled within the fortress. The whispers of prophecy had become a tangible presence, threading through the wind, the trees, and even the stones of the castle itself. Together, they walked through the halls, preparing the pack for what was coming. Kalen's authority was absolute, yet he treated Alara not as a subordinate, but as an equal, trusting her insight and power. The bond between them had become a source of strength, a quiet fire that lit the way even in uncertainty. As they reached the courtyard, the forest beyond stirred with movement. Figures appeared at the edge of the trees, shapes partially hidden by mist. Alara's pulse quickened. She could feel the magic within her respond to their presence, a subtle vibration, a gentle hum that whispered of challenge and destiny. Kalen's hand brushed hers, grounding her. "Remember," he said, "strength is not only in power, it is in clarity, courage, and unity." Alara nodded. The moment had come. She would face the forces that sought to test her, to challenge the life she had claimed for herself. But she would not face them alone. Kalen was at her side, and together they embodied the bond that had grown between them. A bond stronger than fear, stronger than doubt, and stronger than any shadow that dared to approach. The figures stepped closer, revealing themselves in the silver light. They were not enemies of flesh and blood, but spirits, guardians of the forest, ancient and wise, testing those who claimed the power of the land. Their eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the blood moon that had once marked Alara's arrival. One of them stepped forward, a tall figure cloaked in mist. "Alara," it said, voice like wind through leaves, "you have come far, but the trial is not yet complete. To claim the destiny that awaits, you must face the shadows of the past and the truth within your heart." Alara swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the words. She had faced betrayal, fear, and doubt. She had learned to trust herself, to embrace the power that had always been hers, and to rely on Kalen's strength and wisdom. Yet now, standing before these ancient guardians, she realized that the final step required more than courage. It required acceptance, clarity, and the willingness to let go of what had held her back. Kalen stepped beside her, his hand finding hers. "Whatever comes," he said, "we face it together. I will not leave your side." The trial began in silence as the guardians circled them, their presence pressing and ancient. Shadows of the past appeared, visions of her brothers, of the choices that had shaped her life, and of moments she wished she could forget. Fear tried to rise within her, but she drew strength from the bond she shared with Kalen, from the knowledge that she was not alone. With a deep breath, she focused on the magic within her. It was gentle yet strong, flowing through her hands and heart, a connection to the forest, the guardians, and the life she had chosen. She reached out, letting the energy flow outward, weaving threads of light that embraced the shadows and transformed them into understanding. The guardians watched, their expressions inscrutable, until finally the tallest figure spoke again. You have faced the truth and embraced the power within you. You have shown courage, wisdom, and love. The trial is complete. Alara felt a wave of relief, exhaustion, and quiet triumph wash over her. She turned to Kalen, her eyes shining. "We did it," she whispered. Kalen smiled, a rare softness in his gaze. "No, you did it," he said. "I only stood by you." Their connection deepened in that moment, no longer defined by dreams or prophecy, but by shared experience and understanding. They had faced the past, embraced the present, and now stood ready for the future. As the first rays of sunlight broke through the mist, the forest seemed to come alive. The guardians bowed slightly before fading into the light, leaving Alara and Kalen standing together, their hands entwined, their hearts bound by trust, courage, and newfound love. But even in this quiet triumph, they knew that life would continue to test them. The pack would require guidance, the forest would always hold mysteries, and the echoes of past betrayals would linger. Yet, for the first time, Alara felt a clarity she had never known. She was no longer defined by fear, by the choices of her brothers, or by the shadows of the past. She was herself, strong, capable, and connected to the one person who understood her entirely. Days turned into weeks, and the fortress settled into a new rhythm. Alara continued to grow in confidence and power, her magic becoming an extension of herself rather than a hidden secret. Kalen ruled with wisdom and strength, but he was no longer alone in his burdens. Together, they led the pack with balance, understanding, and a quiet acknowledgement of the bond that had been forged through trials, dreams, and destiny. One evening, as they walked through the forest, the moonlight casting silver patterns on the leaves, Kalen spoke softly. "Alara, do you ever think about the dreams that brought us together?" Alara smiled, brushing her fingers against his. "I think about how real they feel now. Dreams led us to each other, but it is our choices that keep us together." Kalen nodded, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "And we have many choices ahead. Yet somehow I feel that whatever comes, we will face it together." They walked in silence, listening to the whisper of the forest, the rustle of leaves, and the soft rhythm of their own hearts. The connection between them had grown beyond prophecy, beyond dreams. It was real, grounded in trust, courage, and love. The blood moon rose one final time, casting a silver glow over the fortress. Alara stood beside Kalen, her hand in his, and looked out over the forest. The trials were not over, she knew, but she felt ready. She had faced shadows, confronted betrayal, and embraced her own power. Now she could face the future, whatever it held, with Kalen by her side. The world was full of uncertainty, but for the first time she felt a sense of peace. She had been betrayed, challenged, and tested, yet she had emerged stronger, wiser, and unafraid. And in the quiet of the forest, under the silver light of the moon, she knew that love and destiny had intertwined, shaping a path that was entirely her own. As dawn approached, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Kalen turned to her. "The world is vast, Alara," he said softly, "and full of possibilities. Whatever awaits us, we face it together." Alara squeezed his hand, a gentle affirmation of their bond. "Together," she echoed. And so, as the first light of day washed over the fortress and the forest beyond, Alara and Kalen stood side by side, ready to embrace their destiny. Their journey had been one of betrayal, dreams, and trials, but it had led them to each other and to a future filled with courage, love, and hope. The whispers of prophecy had faded into the quiet strength of their bond. The shadows of the past had been transformed into understanding and resilience. And as the forest awoke under the golden sun, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them not as individuals, but as one, strong, united, and ready for whatever destiny awaited. Cliffhanger ending. As they walked into the forest hand in hand, a soft wind stirred the leaves. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a distant glow shimmered, an unknown magic, a hint of new adventure. But this time they faced it not with fear, but with trust, courage, and the unbreakable bond they had forged together.